All right, let's dive into something that sounds like it's straight out of a folklore textbook. We're going to look at a scientific study that found a wild connection between migraines, the moon, and a really ancient therapy. And here's the kicker. There's actual scientific data behind it.
So this is the question at the heart of it all, right? Could the phase of the moon, really, have an impact on a medical treatment? It sounds pretty out there, but let's dig into the research and see what's going on.
Okay, so before we even get to the whole moon part, we first have to understand the therapy itself. And believe me, this thing has been around for a long time.
It's called wet cupping therapy, or WCT for short. You might also know it by its traditional name, Hijama, which is common in many parts of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And just to be clear, we're not talking about some new fad here. The sources show this practice goes back thousands of years, used for, well, a whole range of conditions.
And this is where things start to get really interesting. The practice has deep cultural and religious roots. For instance, it's specifically recommended in some Islamic traditions. And that's not just a historical footnote. The traditions don't just say how to do it, they also say when to do it. And trust me, that little detail about timing, it's going to be a huge piece of this puzzle.
So what does this actually look like today in a clinical setting? Well, it's a very controlled 5-step process. First up, everything is sterilized. Super important. Then they place a cup and create some suction. After that, they make these teeny tiny scratches on the skin. We're talking very superficial. The cup goes back on and a little bit of blood is drawn out. And to finish, it's all cleaned up and bandaged.
And here you can see exactly what we're talking about, the procedure from the study. See how the cups are placed on these very specific points on the back? The idea is that these spots are key acupuncture points tied into the body's whole nervous system.
Okay, so we know what it is and how it's done, but let's get to the million-dollar question, especially for anyone who's ever had a migraine. Does it actually work? Let's look at the numbers and see what the study found.
Get ready for this. After just 3 sessions, patients saw an 83% improvement in their migraine disability scores. And that's not just a number. Think about what that means. It's not just about the pain level. It's about getting your life back, being able to work, spend time with family, just function.
And it gets better. It wasn't just about how bad the migraines were. It was also about how often they happened. Patients reported a nearly 70% drop in the frequency of their attacks. Imagine that. Fewer days completely wiped out in a dark room.
And finally, let's talk about the pain itself, the bottom line. On a standard pain scale, they reported a 76% improvement. So you look at all 3 of these key measures, disability, frequency, and pain, and the results look incredibly effective. But just when you think you've got it figured out, the story takes a really weird turn. Because when the researchers started slicing and dicing the data, they realized these amazing results weren't consistent. Something else was going on behind the scenes. And that's when they found it. The twist wasn't about the what or the how. It was about the when. It turns out the effectiveness of the therapy seemed to be completely tied to the phase of the moon.
Okay, look at this, because this is the core of the whole mystery. It's night and day. If patients got the therapy during the first half of the lunar month, between the new moon and the full moon, nothing. No real change in their disability or how many attacks they had. But if they got the exact same therapy in the second half of the month, after the full moon, bam, statistically significant improvements across the board. It's the same procedure, same kinds of patients, but the outcomes were completely different depending on the moon. And this is where your mind just gets blown. Remember what we said about those ancient traditions? The ones that said when to perform hijama? Well, guess what? The traditional texts specifically say to do it on certain odd-numbered days in the second half of the lunar month. It's like this modern, clinical data is an echo, a scientific confirmation of something people might have known for centuries. It's wild.
So, naturally, this brings us to the biggest question of all. How? How on earth could the moon have this kind of effect? Now, the researchers are very clear. They don't have a definitive answer, but they do have a few really interesting theories.
And let's be super clear here. Just like the study is, these are just ideas. They're hypotheses. We're not talking about proven facts. Think of the researchers as detectives at the very beginning of a really strange case. They're just starting to explore a few different leads.
So, what are these leads? Well, one theory is pretty mechanical. Maybe the cupping is literally pulling out substances that cause pain and inflammation. Okay, simple enough. A second, more out there idea involves geomagnetic fields.
The moon messes with Earth's magnetic fields, and maybe, just maybe, those fields mess with our biology. And then there's a third theory that feels pretty compelling. It's all about melatonin. You know, the sleep hormone? If you've ever had a migraine, you know sleep is everything. Melatonin production is affected by light and maybe by those magnetic fields too. Could the moon's cycle be the key that's subtly tuning a hormone we already know is linked to migraines? It's a fascinating thought.
Now, before we all start scheduling our lives around the lunar calendar, we've got to pump the brakes a little. The researchers themselves point out a big challenge with this kind of study. How do you create a placebo for it? You can't really fake wet cupping. And because of that, it's really hard to rule out the power of the placebo effect. You know, the idea that something works simply because you believe it will.
So that's where we're left, with this really big question. Is this a glimpse into a forgotten connection between our own biology and the ancient rhythms of the natural world? Or is it just a weird statistical coincidence that'll disappear once we study it more? We don't have the answer, but what we do have is a genuine medical mystery that absolutely deserves a closer look.